There's been a lot of talk recently about the Denver Nuggets potentially going for a guy like Zach Lavine, and we've got more information as it pertains to the decision making for the Denver Nuggets as we get closer and closer to this year's trade deadline. That being said, this is the Basketball Bulletin where Trevor Lane and I cover all of the teams around the league, so make sure that you guys subscribe. About 80% of the viewers that watch the content are not subscribed, so make sure you join the winning 20% that is. Also, the like goal for today's video is going to be 300 likes. Hopefully we can hit that today. And post below, do you guys think the Nuggets should make the move for Zach Lavine specifically? And let me know in the comments. All right, so we have some new information from Mark Stein earlier today about a lot of teams. Like just a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. I literally just came home, was eating breakfast. Trevor's blowing me up because he's on a trip. Sorry, Trev, I got to say. But he's like, there's so many things that popped up. There's so much. So we're going to cover it over the next few days. But we wanted to kind of talk about this. Unfortunately, the Nuggets did lose that on a big shot from Anthony Simons last night. But, they have been contemplating adding Zach Lavine or another player like that to help this team with their own shot creation, scoring, etc. So let's read what Mark Stein has to talk about here with Jake Fisher. All right. So this is interesting. So to the latest from our notebooks on our first day and change of the ground here in Central Florida, naturally leading off with the Nuggets. Here we go. Zach Lavine scored 36 points in Chicago's surprising victory at Boston. Yes, Zach. We've talked about it a lot on the channel. Zach's been really good this year. It's a shame because his main issue is the contract. And I guess prior to the Nuggets news, and there's also some other interestingly, prior to that, we would think that, the main issue with him is that he's just not going to get traded because of the size of the contract. The new CBA makes it really hard to have a guy like him who's not going to be your first or best player typically on a championship team. I think the Nuggets are a unique situation with the way that their roster is. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But making $45 or so million is just kind of a lot, right? So not long after Denver lost on a layup, that was pretty brutal. Losing, I think, 2 consecutive games to some of the worst teams in the league. Lavine to the Rocky Mountains. Are we headed for an in-season trade that would truly qualify as a blockbuster and involves all-star or all-star adjacent players who had significant salaries? Like urgently, not so fast. As the process around another humbling L, Denver is pondering what to do before the February 6th deadline. Mired in the middle of the ever-stacked West Conference, Denver's limitations in the trade market have naturally pushed team decision makers to contemplate what would be a seismic move. So if you don't really know how things look for the Denver Nuggets, they're kind of strapped. Like their roster, first and foremost, is kind of weird. They got about 5 or 6 guys towards the bottom of their roster, either on guaranteed deals or on 2-ways. You don't really mind as much the 2-way guys, but they got 5 or 6 guys just in their system that they don't really rely on, don't really play. They've got some redundancy with some of the players on the roster. They've got a lot of money tied into their core, which is not really a problem. But basically what that means is that there's not really much of a way to change this. I also don't think that Aaron Gordon is eligible to be traded. Last time I checked, I think that was the case. So basically they're left with and that same applies, by the way, to Murray, I think. I think basically the situation they're in is that they can only trade Porter and Najee, basically. That's what they'd have to do. Ironically, those two together should give them enough salary to trade for Lavine specifically, but they're in a weird spot with just this roster. It's very thin, and they losing players over the last couple of years, I think, really has hampered their team construction, because whether or not you would have those guys out there performing at a certain level for you doesn't really matter that much. What matters is having some more of these players on these roster spots that you can rely on if you need to, but that can be traded out at these salary numbers, and they don't have guys in the middle there, basically, that can be traded. So they're in a really, really strapped situation. So league sources say the Nuggets have indeed weighed whether to trade away Michael Porter Jr. What began with the Nuggets exploring the feasibility of trading Porter for Paul George this summer before George bolted from Clipperland to Philadelphia. I didn't even know they were exploring that, by the way. Has expanded to internal discussions this season, sources say, about whether such a step has to be considered even more strongly now in the wake of Denver's 14-11 struggles. Apart from Porter, Denver otherwise only has reserve center Zeke Najee's $8.8 million contract. And also, they wouldn't want to surrender a critical member of Nuggets coach Mike Malone's current rotation, which is kind of funny. He's the only other guy, yeah, but they kind of have to give up Porter if they want to do a sizable thing. So basically, they talk about how, like I just said, those two players do amount to Lavine, and there's some people that are fans of Lavine apparently in the Nuggets front office. So that's interesting, right? They have people in the front office for the Nuggets that would like that trade. They also talk about, because we're not going to read the entire article here, of course. They also talk about how trading for or getting Lavine specifically and giving up Porter does decrease their aggregate size. They do get smaller. That could potentially create some other situational issues for them by getting a smaller guard or wing player back for them. And that's true. They don't have a ton of size on this team that they can depend on. And Porter is one of those guys that they can depend on. I think 6'10". He's a nice player. He's got that. I think KD is a bit too far, but he's got that big, long, lanky archetype that can shoot from anywhere. I think it's pretty nice. So moving on from there, the Nuggets also know that Porter's presence furnishes them with the extra size, like I was just talking about. This is why sources say some of the Nuggets front office believes that the best course, if they indeed reach the point that it is time to part with Porter. So again, while Porter is out there, while they're talking about it, they're thinking about it, there are people that are fans of Lavine. They haven't made a hardline decision that they want to do this. I don't get the sense they want to move Porter. I think that they like Porter. I think that also the ownership group, I think there's some ties there, if I'm remembering correctly, like same alum and all that stuff. But regardless, I don't think they want to move him. It's just that's their only option. That's what it is. It's their only option to really improve the roster. They also say in this article, they're not even sure how much value he has because of the fact that he has dealt with the injuries in the past. I think he's been mostly healthy for his career after the first, 1 or 2 years. Last time I checked, I could be totally wrong on that. That's just recollection. So correct me if I'm mistaken, of course, no pride there. I could be wrong. But they don't know how much trade value he truly has because of his concerns with that. Some of the things that caused him to slide all the way back in the draft once upon a time. So that's another thing too. And they're saying that because they get smaller, trading for Lavine could be a problem that creates, or could be something that creates more problems on the roster. So they're basically pondering whether or not it might be better to trade him off for a couple of rotation pieces. And I think that's kind of interesting. I do think that's kind of an interesting decision because I think that may be the better way to go. I think you've got better high-end upside if you were able to trade for Lavine, like offensively, of course. But look right here. What if Brooklyn could be convinced to surrender some of its projected cap space this summer by sending both Cam and DFS to Denver for Porter? If you could pull that off, I mean, good Lord. Like, seriously, good Lord. That you do that in a heartbeat, you get that done. Like, I would love that. By the way, Cam, I think, just went off for a 33-point game as well recently. I mean, among those 3 players specifically, I think, Porter probably has the highest offensive ceiling there, but the defense and then also getting 2 usable rotation forwards that are coveted around the league, 3-and-D guys, I think that is massive, right? So that's the kind of thing that they're thinking about, is to whether or not trying to make the all-in star trade or go for some guys that can fit into the roster and not create some of the same issues that Lavine would. Now, Lavine's an interesting guy because I do think having somebody like him that you can just say, hey, go get a bucket is massive, especially for any team, just in general, but especially for a team like the Nuggets that don't have a lot of guys like that, especially if Jamal Murray is just, he's playing like regular season Murray. Yeah, it's the regular season, I know. But the way this team is constructed, they almost need him to play like playoff Murray. I don't think he had a good playoffs last year, but how about years prior playoff Murray? How about that? This team kind of needs him to be closer. I mean, Murray's putting up like 18, 19 points, right? He's got to be closer to like 25 if he's not there. I don't think he is. In fact, I think Porter is closer to 25. So Murray, okay, never mind. I was looking at some other stuff here. So Murray's at 18. Porter's at 18. What it was is Porter probably had like a recent game where he was around there because I clicked it in it. Yeah, 24. This is a recent game versus New Orleans. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of how things are looking, but they need more production from their guys. They don't got a lot of guys. And what it leads to is an increased and over-reliance on Nikola Jokic. And I got to say, it's kind of insane that they've got this record. You could spin it either way. You could say it's kind of like good that they've got this record, or obviously not like what they want to be, but they should have a worse record, but they've relied on him. He's played all but 3 games this year for them. And that was only because I believe he had a childbirth in the family. So, or his own kid, excuse me, I should say. But he's giving them basically a 31-point triple-double. That's kind of insane. But like, they're not able to really truly step away. And some of that's because, like, they talked about how deep the West is. If you look at the West standing, so many teams are just kind of flip-flopped. Like, we typically follow the Lakers here, but like the Lakers dropped 3 seeding spots yesterday because a couple teams lost and they won their game. And that's kind of how the West is now. But that's how it's going to be for like all the slots after like, I think the top 3. It's going to just be like that for the entirety of the season. So when you can get a guy like that, like Lavine specifically, to help you, and he can go out there and get a bucket, he can go off for 30 points here and there. Like, I think that's nice. And he also is somebody you can rely on, you know, when Murray sometimes is a little bit up and down. And when you don't want to put all that extra burden on Jokic, I think that's huge. But again, I think that the opposite is also true, that having the other guys in their roster could be nice. I think that they also could benefit greatly. Like, let's say that, I don't know if the salaries match up, of course. I'm just going to throw out a name because we're talking about the Nets. Let's say they could get DFS and Nick Claxton. I think that'd be huge for this team. I think they could really use a backup center. I think that'd be huge because they've got some guys here, Saric and Jordan. I think that could be huge for them. But I think the tricky thing is with so much being on Jokic, while that's cool, the team functions at its best. The tricky thing with getting a backup center is that they're only going to play 10 minutes per game. So do you need somebody the quality of Claxton? No, but we're talking about the Nets. Maybe, okay, let's say Day'Ron Sharpe. That works too. Like, I think somebody you can put out there to rely on, you know, for just a solid 10 minutes per game at the backup center position, I think is cool. I don't really like the players that they've got in their system right now. Another 3-and-D player could be nice. A ball creator like Zach Lavine's, excuse me, my alarm is going off, would also be nice. But the thing is, that just circles all the way back to the beginning of the video where I said this team has a lot of roster construction issues that Jokic is basically papering over. And also there are some players that have been really good this year. Gordon, Braun, these guys have been really, really good this year for them. And I think that's been huge for them, of course, but I think they can definitely get better. It's just they don't have the opportunity to do so. And Porter, again, he's been good for them too. There's not much reason to say that you want to get off of him other than the fact that you kind of have to. I wanted to look at some of their lineup data here. And so all their best lineups include Jokic if they've got a reasonable amount of minutes or possessions. They do have this one here. Dario, Porter, Watson, Braun, and Murray. That's actually surprisingly been pretty good. 78 possessions. Not like it's the craziest thing, but they're plus 18 with that group. So that group has been successful on the court in the minutes they've been given. And for the most part, the Nuggets lineups have all been pretty successful for their most used lineups out there. They're net +3 with their lineups grouping, and they're pretty good out there. All their numbers say they should probably be better, but losing 2 games like the way that they did recently, I don't think is, you know, the right way to kind of go. I think that's really going to hamper these guys. Losing to, it wasn't consecutive. I said consecutive, but Washington and Portland there, you know, those are 2 games that you shouldn't have lost. They really aren't. I wanted to just also filter this a little bit. This will be the last thing that we do. I wanted to see how things look with Porter specifically off the court and how this team has functioned so far without him just in general. Now, again, if he's traded, you're probably plugging in some good players, of course, because they're not going to give him up for anything. You're going to be plugging in some good players, and that could be what helps tremendously. But yeah, Porter's been huge for them. They're getting blitzed when he's not on the court. So that's massive. Although I will say, and this is not to disparage him or anybody, but I do think that the Nuggets kind of play their main guys a lot together. And so that could be because, you know, all their main, like Jokic is out there a lot, like things like that. That's not a problem though. But regardless, he's giving them 18, 19 points per game. They need it, right? So what do you guys think? All that down below and more. I would like to hear it from you guys in the comments. And like I said, there was that massive article. We're going to cover so much of it. So make sure you do subscribe. Make sure you stay tuned and check out our latest video where Trevor and I talk about the center market and some interesting names like Clint Capella being available right now on the market. Should the Nuggets go get? No, like I said, they're kind of in a weird spot. You only need about 10 minutes from a backup guy, but we'll see what happens.